Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk pretty briefly about observational learning, but this is the third way that we learn things, and we learn a whole lot by observing others. And animals, of course, the monkey here learns from us as well. So just by watching other people and imitating other people, we can learn a lot. And that's called observational learning. So it's just learning by observing others, by imitating, and it's learning without direct experience. You think about it, when we watch a YouTube video on how to do something, we're learning about how to do something without direct experience of doing that. And sometimes when we go to actually do it, it doesn't work out as well as in the video, and we might have to go back and watch that video again. But we still have learned how to do that skill just from watching that YouTube video. So modeling is where, and this is what kids do a lot when they're learning new behaviors growing up, is they observe and they imitate certain behaviors. And animals definitely do this. I had a cute video of Bonnie the orangutan, and she learned how to whistle because her keeper would come in and serve her breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever, and he always whistled while he came in and gave her food, and she watched how he did it and eventually figured out how to do it herself. So Albert Bandura is one of the main psychologists that researched in this area, and he really pioneered the idea that modeling, we actually do learn through modeling. And he also talked about vicarious learning. So, especially little kids, they learn if little Johnny over there is getting in trouble for scribbling on his desk, that I don't want to do that either. I don't want to get in trouble too. Or little Johnny might be getting rewarded for doing something really good, and we learn, oh, I want to do that too. I'd like to get a reinforcement too. So we can just learn by watching other people. So Albert Bandura did a famous experiment called the Bobo doll experiment, and his goal in this was to really demonstrate how children can observe and adopt aggressive behaviors that's modeled by adults. And so he was kind of looking at modeling in a little bit of a negative way, but he was also concerned about positive modeling as well. And we'll talk at the end about positive modeling. But his Bobo doll experiment actually demonstrated that kids will imitate violent behavior. So what he did was he put and this was in the 1960s or so, so the film quality isn't so great here, but what he did was he put a little kid in a room, and there was a window in there where he could watch what the adult was doing, and the adult would be punching this Bobo doll bag and kicking it and beating it with a hammer. You can't really see the hammer here, it looks a little bad. And then wouldn't you know, the little kids go into the same room there and they do exactly the same thing that the adults did. And actually he was pretty progressive here in that he included boys and girls. And girls, the little girl here with the hammer, behaved just as aggressively as the boys. So I don't know if that's a good thing. Do you guys see any flaws in this study? This is a Bobo doll. I don't know if any of you are familiar with these from your own childhood, but it's like an inflatable thing, and it has kind of a weight in the bottom. And what's it designed for? It's actually designed to be punched. So that's part of the flaw that I see in this experiment. If it had been like a baby doll or a teddy bear, I wonder if the kids' responses would have been different. So that's something to think about. But Bandura has a lot of great theories. But one of his main theories that has been sort of disputed in psychology, there are psychologists that believe that that violence is really bad for kids and they'll imitate that violence. And then there are psychologists that say that the violence is not necessarily violence in the media does not necessarily lead to people being violent. But little kids are actually pretty easily influenced, and so there is definitely a problem with young children repeating violent behavior. I have a little nephew, and I think he was about 6 years old or something, and he was watching WWE, I believe it is. And, he was karate chopping and doing all the moves that they do on that show to people, not recognizing that he could actually hurt other people. And so that's one of the reasons why little kids shouldn't watch it, because they don't really have the understanding of the difference between fantasy and reality. We'll talk more about that in developmental psychology. But there is evidence that media violence can contribute to aggressive behavior, certainly desensitize us to violence. and especially for children. Um, but I don't know. Do you guys think TV violence promotes aggressive behavior in adults and in children? So let's talk about video games and then we'll try to answer that question a little bit. So this is a really interesting video and there's a link to it here, but we can't watch it here because they can't get the sound to play. But this was a young 18-year-old kid who had a pretty troubled upbringing, spent a lot of time in foster care. I don't know where his parents were. He was living with an uncle at the time that he committed this crime, and the uncle really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him. He was playing like 18 hours a day. He was spending his time playing Grand Theft Auto, had nothing else going on in his life at all. And what happened was he played Grand Theft Auto and somehow he decided he was going to go steal a car like they do in Grand Theft Auto, stole a car, got pulled over by a police officer, and when he was in the precinct, he grabbed one of the police officers' gun and shot 3 police officers, stole one of their keys, and stole a squad car outside and drove off. And when he was arrested, he just said, life is like a video game, you gotta die sometime. So, pretty sad. And so there was a lot of part of his defense. His lawyers actually tried to use this as a defense, saying that if it hadn't been for Grand Theft Auto, he wouldn't have committed this crime. The jury didn't believe him and actually sentenced him to death. But this is somebody that probably had some mental health issues, that probably needed some positive influence in their life. And instead of that, he got Grand Theft Auto for 20 hours a day. So really sad to see a young person's life ruined, basically, because of really bad choices. Not so much because of Grand Theft Auto, but you could make an argument had he not been playing Grand Theft Auto. He wouldn't have been doing this. So there are people that are vulnerable to violence and to video games. We know that there are people that are really addicted to video games, and some people can play them and have a good time and enjoy them and not become addicted. And then other people can become really seriously addicted, and it can be a big problem for them. So sad case. Is GTA responsible for his acts? They tried to prove that in court, and the people did not believe that that was the case. If everybody that played violent video games became violent, we'd be a pretty violent society today. So people that are vulnerable would be people with mental health issues, young people, people with developmental delays that maybe don't have really good judgment, and people who really get addicted to those video games would be the most likely to become aggressive because of it or influence in there. And so this is an interesting question. When we talk about social psychology, we'll answer this question a little bit too. But has violence in our society increased in the past few decades? It seems like it has. We see more mass shootings. We see, more violence on television and in movies and in video games. But I think there is a difference between real violence and television violence and TV violence, or not TV, movie violence or video game violence. Even though they're pretty realistic looking, it's still really different than actually seeing real violence. And I do think that we're not completely desensitized to violence. And some of my students in the past have suggested, if you think about in the Roman times, people would go to the Colosseum and watch the gladiator fight the lion to death, or one or the other of them was going to get killed, and that's pretty brutal. And you think about it in Western times, the whole family would go to hangings to see the criminals get hung and killed right in front of them. I mean, that's a pretty gruesome thing for anybody to watch. That would be a traumatic experience for a kid to actually watch. So to end on a more positive note, so we can learn a whole lot through observational learning. And we can also learn good things through observational learning. So if you guys grew up watching Sesame Street at all, or Dora, or some of the other shows, we can learn a lot of positive things and really even good skills just by watching other people do things on television and of course on YouTube too. So children will imitate positive behaviors. They just don't have really good judgment at a young age, and so they will imitate violent and aggressive behaviors just as well as they would positive behavior. So as adults, we have to be really cautious about what our children are watching and doing. But as kids get older into those late teen years, their judgment is much better and they're much more capable of being able to see violent things and understand that it's not real and it's not something to repeat. So anyway, that is it on observational learning.